Miter saws are notoriously messy tools. There's just no getting around it. But I've been on a mission to make some of them at least more tolerable. And I'm happy to report that you can now get everything that I've designed for the DeWALT DW and DW716 in a complete package and at a heavily discounted price over buying parts individually. So what do you get in the kit? You get the upgraded dust collection boot. This is going to do all the heavy lifting behind the blade. A replacement bracket or rear guard. This is what's going to give us a secure way to mount the dust boot. You also get a dust collection throat plate. This is what's going to capture everything that falls beneath the throat plate that ends up all over your feet and all over your workbench. And one really nice feature with this throat plate is that it uses replaceable zero clearance inserts. And finally, you get this ultra compact 90-degree elbow so you can get your saw as close to the wall as possible. For the install, you're going to need a couple of Torx head drivers, specifically a T10, 15, 20, and 30, and I'll show you exactly where you need each one of those here as we go. Now, after unplugging your saw, remove the factory throat plate and set aside the T20 screws. We're going to reuse these to install the new plate, so don't lose them. Next, remove the factory dust boot by removing the two T15 screws on each side of the rear guard or bracket, and then pulling it down and out of the dust port. Now, if you have a DW saw, you won't even have this dust boot. It's going to be a metal bracket back there, so you can skip this step. Also, it's worth mentioning that you technically do not have to do the next step on the DWS models, and that'd be removing the rear guard, which is held in place with two T30 screws for those taking notes. We do find though that most folks with the DWS saw still purchase the rear guard anyways when buying parts individually, so we threw it in the kit. Also, those screws can be difficult to remove. I do recommend an impact driver and a quality bit if you're having trouble. Okay, so now we can move on to the throat plate. You'll find locating tabs on the shroud, too short and too long, and mating slots on the underside of the throat plate, so it can only be installed in one direction. It's a good idea to do a dry run here so you're familiar with how it should go together. Put a few drops of super glue into each one of the slots, and then insert the tabs, pushing down firmly and squarely into the throat plate, and hold it there for a few seconds so the glue has a chance to start curing. There could still be a small gap between the plate and the shroud, and that's totally fine. It doesn't affect the functionality of the throat plate, but if you want, you can run a small bead of glue around the edge of the shroud to seal it up. Once it's cured enough to handle, slide the throat plate back into the blade trough, under the fence, and reinstall the screws that we took out earlier. With the throat plate and the rear guard installed, you can now install the dust boot. Facing the saw, hold it relatively flat with the flat side of the boot towards the front of the saw. Hold it in half and lay one side over the other, making a cone shape, and then slide the tip of that cone into the dust port until it stops. Open up the very front of the dust boot and slide the ears over the bracket and secure it with the T10 screws that came pre-installed in the bracket using the upper set of holes in the boot. Now push down and pull towards you to remove the zero clearance insert, and then lower the saw to replicate an actual cut, and check to make sure that the boot is in the proper location. When properly installed, it should not come in contact with the material that you're cutting, except for tall pieces on miters, and it should only touch the fence or material and then slide down really when mitering, even with the fences fully closed off. To reinstall the insert, slide it into its dovetail track, and then just slide it all the way back until it clicks into place. And the last step is to install the 90-degree elbow. The smaller end is meant to be a friction fit onto the dust port in the rear. If you order a kit for the DW model or a 90-degree fitting by itself, it'll also come with this adapter to attach to the older style DeWALT vacuum ports. The larger side is designed to fit 36mm Festool hose, 1 7/8" and 2.5" shop vac hose, and 2.5" dust collection hose. Now, if you've made it this far, you're probably at least a little bit curious as to how well it works. While not perfect, it works incredibly well, although this stuff is really hard to pick up on camera, so you might have to rely on comments from others already using these parts and reviews on our website and on Etsy. This setup has been meticulously designed to accommodate thick stock and thin, real wood and MDF, so that you now have the most effective dust collection setup available for the DW and DWS716 miter saws. If you're interested in checking out this setup or some of the other parts and pieces we have, head over to inspirewoodcraft.com to take a look.